So I'm not sure of how much you've had an opportunity to hear about today, Senator, but the SAFE Act passed the House. Of course, that measure would make it more difficult for refugees from Syria as well as Iraq to come into this country. The Senate still has to vote. So, Senator, how will you vote?
Well, first and foremost, we have to understand the most critical, essential thing is to keep our country safe. And we need to make sure we do that. Now, the Senate has sat in classified briefings and had hearings already, and we've seen how this 18-month to 2-year process of all the ways to get into the country, the most difficult way for anyone to get into the country is through the refugee process. So all this focus on the refugee process, when there's the visa waiver program, student visas, all these other ways that are far easier if you were going to be a terrorist to look at getting into this country. And so what frustrates me is that we seem to have a lot of political swirl around issues that, of course, we want to make sure that they're rock solid, but issues that are not as focused on actually solving the problem or meeting the challenge of keeping us safe. And that's what frustrates me. So this is a lot of theatrics that are involved in this, and the true story about the process is not coming out. So I won't support something that's going to grind to a halt a program that is mostly the most vulnerable of people, women and children, people who've been victims of torture. And it's a very narrow program compared to Canada is taking many more people than us, as well as even Paris has now said they're going to move forward with taking, I think, about 30,000 refugees. So I believe we should continue to make sure the program is strong, solid. It takes a long time to go through, but I won't be supporting, I don't see myself supporting this legislation.
That's your final word on that, huh?
Yes.
You will not support it. Let's talk about the issue of restrictions. South Carolina's governor, Nikki Haley, has said no. Do you think that some governors are reacting too quickly?
Well, absolutely. I'm not sure what your governor knows, and I'm actually have met her a number of times. And my point is that if you walk through the entire process, all the safeguards, all the vetting, you will see a process that actually has improved even over recent months and years. This idea that we as a country would turn our backs on victims, would turn our backs on people who have been the subject of violence from terrorists, to me is just very much against who we say we are, especially a program like this that has proven safe. But again, if governors really want to keep themselves safe, and senators like myself do, there's a lot of other things that we should be focused on, like the loopholes that make it easy for people on the terrorist no-fly list in our country to be able to buy automatic weapons like that were used in South Carolina, like the visa waiver program, like tourist visas. All of these things we need to make sure we're clamping down on even more. It just seems opportune in a sense to be focusing on the most difficult way for someone to get into this country, which is a refugee process that takes almost 2 years for someone to complete and has the most safeguards of any way of entering the United States.
The mastermind behind the Paris terrorist attacks was killed. That has been confirmed. That happened earlier today. Are you concerned about extremist cells?
Of course I am. I'm concerned about extremist cells. I'm concerned about homegrown lone wolf terrorists. I'm concerned about people being radicalized. We should be concerned as a society. We should be doing a lot more than we're doing right now, in my opinion. Things like properly funding the agencies that should be keeping us safe. We've had a lot of appointments to critical agencies that keep us safe as well, appointments being held up by Congress. There's a lot that we need to do if we're really going to focus on the sources of the problems that threaten the United States. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm in South Carolina supporting Hillary Clinton, because she has a very pragmatic approach, evidence-based approach about what is going to keep us most safe, and believes that we do need to tighten up on everything from the visa waiver program to the refugee program to even student visas or even immigration coming across our borders. But we should not in any way, and this is what I respect about her, is sacrifice the truth of who we are, a country that is there for people who are being experiencing some of the most horrific violence and torture and oppression around the globe.
You talk about people being radicalized and how they are actually being approached a lot of times is through social media.
Yes, it's actually something I've been very engaged with. We've held hearings on my committee on Homeland Security, and it's something that we have to have, in my opinion, an even better strategy about doing that. And that doesn't necessarily mean the government doing it, but it means empowering other people And some of the ideas that seem to be coming forward through the State Department, through the White House, to confront this are good, but I want to pursue them with a lot more aggressively than are being pursued right now.
You talked about Secretary Clinton and her mission. That's the reason, in fact, that you are in South Carolina right now. What are some of her ideas? And certainly you've said that she is quite a leader. You've said that many times. Give me some fine points as to her leadership skills that you've watched and how it's benefited this country.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, because she gave a foreign policy speech today, really talking about the crisis that I think is on most Americans' minds. And for her to lay out in great detail, really a three-prong approach. First and foremost, we want to destroy ISIS, and working with our allies accomplish that. Secondly, we want to dismantle the mechanisms which terrorists are using to get foreign fighters, to move arms and resources, and that's something as an intelligence as well as an aggressive action that other countries we need to join with. And then finally, we want to harden the security of our own country, and that means everything from borders. We saw some people trying to move up from Honduras being captured. We want to make sure that we keep our homeland safe. So her focus, which I really appreciate, is about going even further to make sure that we remove this threat, we destroy this threat, and that we work in conjunction. We already saw that France had some challenges with sharing information, working in cooperation with our allies. And so from her experiences working as Secretary of State, I'm confident, and especially her speech, which is getting rave reviews, that she has a very good strategy as well as individual tactics to do something about it. But her experience is unlike anybody who's ever been the President of the United States in the past. Nobody has had the kind of training for the most important job on the planet Earth that she has. Someone who has served as a senator, digging in deep to the issues, understanding not just the legislative activities, but the breadth of issues a senator has to deal with, from domestic infrastructure to foreign relations. She served as First Lady right next to the President of the United States. Nobody knows the job as well as she does. And she served as Secretary of State, fighting for American values at home and abroad. But her career is even greater than that, and South Carolinians should know that. She virtually started her career here by coming out of law school, not joining one of these high-paying firms. I graduated from the same law school. Trust me, that people were lining up to hire folks like her. She said no. Instead, she worked for the Children's Defense Fund, starting in many ways where she's ended as a grandmother and a mother. She started working for kids and families here in South Carolina, actually doing some of her work. So here's somebody from her entire career focused on families, focused on children, focused on safety and security, focused on empowering women, not just here in the nation, but she was probably one of the greatest voices in the last decade for empowering women globally, because we understand that when you support a woman, you support a family. When you support a family, you support community, you support towns, neighborhoods, cities. And so to see this consistency of action, the training, the exposure, the knowledge, the expertise that she's developed makes me an enthusiastic supporter of hers, because this is not a time for on-the-job training. We want somebody that's been there in the Situation Room on countless occasions, was there when we went after Osama bin Laden, was there in other countries visiting the nations where we're having a lot of challenges with terrorism, has been there in the White House during the 90s, during some of the best economic years we've had under then President Clinton, seeing the insides, and been there as a senator, serving her home state in ways that actually where she enjoyed praise from both sides of the aisle for what kind of senator she was. And that gives me tremendous confidence and makes me, who loves my country, who wants to see my country safe, secure, strong, and prosperous, makes me really want to fight for her.
You, in fact, will speak with African American mayors in South Carolina during your visit, and will bring that message, Secretary of State Clinton's message, to them. As a former mayor of New Jersey's largest city, you had to lead your city through Hurricane Sandy and the flooding that you experienced. We certainly have experienced devastating flooding here. What will you say to our new mayor? We have a new mayor after 40 years of Joe Riley. What will you perhaps suggest to our mayor to help deal with the issue of flooding if that issue happens to come up, and you can make some suggestions to improve our city.
Well, the beautiful thing about mayors is when we get together, we're practitioners. So we share information and share ideas. I found myself in a great collection of mayors when I first got into office, and really drew a lot of information from Mayor Rendell, who had then gone on to governor, from Mayor Bloomberg, and really sought out Mayor Nutter and others, learning the best I could of Philadelphia. And so that's what I love about when mayors get together. I think it's going to be very much shop talk there. Everything from the sexy subjects of parking meter efficiency to bigger issues about how do you empower the best education possible in your community. So you've got a great new mayor, tremendous promise, and I look forward to being one of those resources. I love the fact that I still get, even as a senator now, I still get calls from mayors that want to ask me, hey, tell me about that prisoner reentry program, or that veterans court that you did, or how did you create one of the nation's first pro bono legal service projects for men and women coming home from prison, helping them get better and be empowered to work in the workforce. The innovations that you do as a mayor don't stop in your city. They actually inspire other mayors as well. I benefited from that, and I hope to be able to share with your new mayor. Now, I'll tell you about the flooding. I mean, this is one of those examples of like, what kind of country are we going to be? You know, you've had a state that has had representatives in Congress who said we shouldn't do this kind of support for terrible disasters like Superstorm Sandy that hit my state. And I still remember I was standing right outside of the Senate when a reporter comes up to me and says, well, so-and-so and so-and-so didn't vote, didn't support you when you need Sandy funds. What are you going to do about South Carolina? I said, what am I going to do about South Carolina? There are people in that state that need these resources. They are Americans, and I've pledged an oath to support my country, and I'm going to be there for them and vote in support of emergency resources. And that's what we have to understand. You know, I love the ideals of self-reliance. I love the ideals of personal responsibility. But we also have to understand that rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon, didn't map the human genome, didn't build barns or build this nation's infrastructure. It was Americans pulling together and being there for each other. We are a nation with a wonderful Declaration of Independence, but we are also a nation with a spirit of interdependence, where we depend on each other, rely on each other, support each other, especially when the chips are down and crisis hits. And so I'm happy to stand up to your mayor and tell him, now or in the future, if you have a crisis, if something bad happens, God forbid, whether it be man-made, as we've seen with some of the horrible shootings around our country, or whether it's Mother Nature. I may be a Jersey boy, but when crisis hits here, you consider me a South Carolinian.
Very happy to hear that. So it sounds like our roads will be dry, and despite the rain, that you're going to.
Well, I'm going to support. I will be one of these people supporting investments in infrastructure. And by the way, for those fiscally conservatives that are listening to me, this is the fiscally conservative thing to do. People don't understand that when you invest in resiliency, when you invest in infrastructure, it actually creates economic growth, a multiplier effect. Not only the jobs that people get to put to work to do those things, but we know nationally, a dollar invested in infrastructure creates about $2 return in economic development.
Is that why you were able to be so successful in creating jobs and affordable housing, from what I understand, to levels not seen since the 60s?
Yeah, I mean, look, we were in the midst of a recession. People told me what we could not do. But one thing I knew was to create creative public-private partnerships. And we worked with everybody, from unions to financiers on Wall Street, to get major projects going, as well as worked with the Obama administration, who did not believe, like many people do, in a trickle-down economics. If we just help the rich get richer, everything's going to be all right. No, we need to build our country from the middle class out. And that's why I supported President Obama. And frankly, to listen to Hillary Clinton's economic plan, who really understands kitchen table economics, that's something that I think is really important. So I want a president that knows that it's not somehow against the free market enterprise to invest in roads and bridges and dams. Well, no, you know what? We're here today because Republicans like Eisenhower built great projects, Hoover Dam and the federal highway system. All those things helped us to create some of the best free market enterprise on the globe. And so I remember our history when Republicans and Democrats used to join together to invest in infrastructure, to invest in education. We used to be the top country on the globe for percentage of population graduating from college. Well, now we're not that anymore. We've forgotten our past. Other countries are beating us, actually. Well, I want to be number one again in education, in infrastructure, in medical research. Dollars invested in medical research produce massive benefits in terms of returns for society, including the health of people. My father died of Parkinson's disease. We should be the country not just conquering the moon or past successes in diseases, but we should be the country now forging the new path ahead. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of these diseases, we should be the ones that are solving this by investing in the research that's going to secure our future and relieve the suffering of many families like my own.
Why do you believe that there is such contention between the parties? Because that seems to be what's stifling the growth of our nation, because one party believes this, one party believes this, and they simply can't meet in the aisle.
Well, I don't believe that often what we hear about the parties in Washington reflects what goes on in our neighborhoods. We all know this. We have friends that are Democrats, friends that are Republicans, and they don't let posturing and politics get in the way of practically working together. There are many business enterprises in this state that are successful, and they have Dems and Republicans working for those better business enterprises. That's why I loved being a mayor. It's because at the end of the day, it was just get it done and partner with anybody. And I partnered with conservative groups like the Manhattan Institute, which is a right-wing institute in New York. I partnered with the Bush administration when they were there. I partnered with Governor Chris Christie, who was a governor during most of my time as mayor, and found constructive ways to move the ball forward. And that's really what we need. And it frustrates me to see the reflexive attacks that are often done on people of both parties. I remember reading some study, I wish I could remember exactly where it was, where they did a poll and said, here's a policy position. They called it a Democratic policy position. Well, right away, 80% of Republicans were against it. Well, then they switched it and said, oh, this is a Republican policy position. And then it flipped. 80% of Republicans were for it. We've got to get rid of that reflexive partisanship in our country. And especially on issues of national security, we need to start coming together and saying, hey, let's talk substantively about how we can achieve our goals and our ends without sacrificing the truth of who we are as a nation, because we are a great nation, not just because of what we achieve ourselves, but because what have we been willing to do for the globe, from the Marshall Plan to helping refugees, to helping people seeking asylum. We are the most generous nation on the planet Earth, and I don't want that to change. It's what makes us distinctive. It's what makes us great. You want to talk about dances for teenagers? Because I would like to discuss teenage dance.
We don't have that much space.
We don't have that much. I want to know from a mother, how do you feel right now being stuck at work with a guy from Jersey while your daughter is at her first dance?
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, I appreciate you understanding.
I understand more than you know, because God help my daughter if I ever have when I have a child and it's a daughter, God help her. I might be locking her in a basement.
I'm concerned about him.
Oh.
Than her, Okay. What else do we need to tackle? Have you? I'm just curious if you've actually had an opportunity to reach out to our new mayor.
No, that's why I'm so excited.
Okay.
That's why I'm so excited about this convening of mayors. Look, most people don't realize, and I know we have your state and even my state has farm area, your state has rural area, but most Americans now, 85% live in cities or directly in their suburbs. And these are key nodes for education, for innovation, for science, technology, for the growth in many ways of our nation. And so having a focus on cities is really important, not just for mayors, but we need governors and presidents that really understand how critical our cities are in keeping us globally competitive. And I'll tell you, the reason why I love South Carolina is you guys do a lot of things. My very first piece of legislation, I did it with Tim Scott, and it was to model a South Carolina program for apprenticeships. You're the best apprenticeship state in the country. Now here we have this nation where you have millions of jobs that are open because the people don't have the right skills to meet those jobs. Well, this state has been an innovator in that. We should take that experience and the successes that South Carolina is having them, expand them in South Carolina, expand them globally. It's one way to get to dealing with a lot of our problems with the struggles for the middle class. It's one of the reasons why I'm pleased that one of Hillary Clinton's first policy papers was about this issue of apprenticeships, expanding apprenticeships. Interestingly, I like to compare ourselves to other nations because I like to see how we're beating them. Well, unfortunately, one area we're losing out on other nations is countries much smaller than us, like England, have nearly twice the number of apprenticeships we have in raw numbers. That's crazy. We've got to start learning that college is a great aspiration. And I would like for most of our kids to be aspiring to college, but it's not necessary in this new economy where you can get a job as a machinist and be well secure in the middle class, where you can get a job as a coder. People are hiring people who can do computer code now. They don't care if they even have a high school degree. If you're a great coder, this globe is in serious demand of people that can do coding. And so for the medical professions to computer professions, we need more people with those middle skill jobs that have specific training that can empower them for the 21st century. And that's, again, this is why I think that pragmatism is so important in our country, to get away from partisanship, get back to pragmatism. And Hillary Clinton is somebody who has seen her share of partisanship, and what I mean by that is that she's one of those people that often makes Republicans curl their toes. They often don't even give her a chance to listen to her message, and that's what I'm really calling for people to be, is just listen to and I've dealt now with a number of presidential campaigns, and to see the kind of thoughtfulness that she's putting into her policy statements. And by the way, it's a thoughtfulness that isn't even poll driven. How could she came out, first policy speech was about prisoner reentry. Well, that's not the most popular issue. That doesn't rank in the top 10, I'm sure, but she knew it's killing our country in terms of how much money it's draining out of our economy to have the largest prison population on the globe. We have 4 to 5% of the population of the globe, but we have 1 out of every 4 in prison people is in the United States. 1 out of every 4 imprisoned people on the globe is in America, and we're paying the cost of that. And then she comes out with another policy paper which shocked me, because again, not poll driven, this is what she believes, and actually it's actually what she heard. When she started doing her early campaigning, more and more families were coming up of all backgrounds. All were coming up to her and saying, we have a terrible problem with addiction. We have a terrible problem with prescription drugs, terrible heroin epidemic. And here is a person that listened to people and said, wait a minute, pause my campaign, whatever we were thinking about doing our next policy rollout, we need to speak to this issue because it's causing so much harm and damage. And it's not just about locking people up. We've tried that in America, this failed war on drugs, locking up the addicted. No, we need to find a way to treat people and find ways to use law enforcement to prevent these prescription drugs and this heroin from becoming so available. So she earned a lot of respect from me early in the campaign by speaking to real issues, not poll-driven ones. And then the substance with which she's writing about some of these issues that she's been working on for decades, from the time of the Children's Defense Fund, from her time in the White House, taking on interest groups like drug companies and others. There's a consistency about her that I like. There's a depth of her analysis that's really important, and there's an experience that I think is going to make her a great president.
Certainly you come to a state that has had a lot of tragedy this year. We had the shooting of an unarmed man by a police officer, and certainly the shooting at Emmanuel AME Church. And our state has in some ways grown as a result of these two events, but there's still a lot of healing to do. What has been your reaction to some of what you have seen happen in South Carolina in 2015?
Well, first of all, I think South Carolina has really taught America about how to deal with crisis and how a community can come together. I mean, this has been a master's class in dignity that has been shown in this state amidst a tremendous trial. And to see that in some cases, Democrats and Republicans have come together and actually done some substantive things, like body camera legislation, to see the forgiveness of a church that was attacked and assaulted, it shook people around the country, if not around the world, to see that strength of character and that courage of conviction and the courage of Christianity there that was so profoundly evidenced. And so I'm really I fell in love more with South Carolina just watching a lot of these challenges. But you're right, there's a lot more to do. There's a lot more healing that has to do. But it goes a lot faster, that healing, when we're conscious of it, when we pay attention to it, and not when we try to pretend it doesn't exist. And so that's what I'm hoping continues in this state, that South Carolina continues to lead when it comes to addressing issues of police accountability. And I ran a police force. Let me tell you, some of the most courageous Americans in America, hands down, are our law enforcement. And the kind of harm's way they put themselves in without even thinking about it on a daily basis, we all should be patting police officers on the back and applauding them for their courageous actions on a consistent basis. And then they have to endure often the worst of us. They see us at our worst often, the worst of humanity, the most tragic incidences, the most painful points of our lives when people are most broken. But that's all said, we still need to have the highest levels of accountability, and we can be improving accountability more than we're doing right now. It's really that balance. And by the way, good cops want greater accountability. It helps them have better relations with the community. It helps them create deeper partnerships. And so things like body cameras are an important step forward, because what I've seen from my research is that body cameras don't only help. Everybody thinks that they're going to help the people. Really, they protect the cops too. To protect our officers from, complaints against police officers have gone down when you've gotten body cameras, and police officers are much better able often to defend themselves. Not to mention how it's being used in training now, where you take the actual stops. I know police officers, friends of mine, my former police director uses those dash cams and the like in their training. So I just hope that South Carolina doesn't stop. There's a lot more work to do, especially in criminal justice reform, when it comes to the fact that we are churning African Americans at a massively disproportionate rate into our criminal justice system. People should know there's no difference between blacks and whites for drug use in America. None. They're virtually the same. Drug dealing, no difference. In fact, some studies have shown that young white men have a little bit higher rates of dealing drugs than young black men. But let's just assume there's no difference. But yet, African Americans who use marijuana versus a white person is about 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for that. And this creates wild disparities of incarceration. Your state has 27, 28% blacks, but over 50% of your prison population. My state, 14% African Americans, 15% African Americans, almost over 60% of the prison population African American. And this is not simply correlated to blacks committing more crimes. We know that they don't on drug crimes, which is the major reason why we see this explosion in drugs. So we need to just have honest conversations, not emotional ones, but let's just look at the data and understand that we want our justice system to reflect our highest aspirations as a country for all people. We want to be a nation with equal justice under the law, as it says over the Supreme Court, and we want a nation, what we all say when we pledge allegiance, of a nation of liberty and justice for all. And those things are going to go a long way to healing when we start talking honestly, not about emotion only, not about a lot of the pain and anger people feel on both sides of this, defensiveness on both sides of this. We want to try to get to a point where we can start talking about constructively, what do we want to improve? And there are so many things we can do, like just the veterans that come back home to this state and New Jersey. Too many of them get churned into the criminal justice system themselves. Can't we do better? Can't we create veterans courts around this country that understand the particular needs of veterans who have post-traumatic stress issues or other mental health issues? Hey, can't we start thinking about what is working to reduce African American incarceration? Georgia, their governor is running around, Republican governor, going to black churches, talking about reducing the black male incarceration rate 20% because of common sense reforms. Mississippi's done some common sense reforms. Well, let's make those common sense reforms spread more out throughout our country in a very pragmatic way. That's why I'm happy to hear when Secretary Clinton talks about these issues, she talks about them from a place of pragmatism and data analysis, as well as heart. And the heart basically says what all Americans want, Republicans and Democrats. Let's better reflect our values and ideals in practice. Let's be a nation of safety and security, but also of compassion and redemption.